Texas authorities warning Americans not to travel to Mexico during spring break because of the risk of cartel violence.
Well, Mexican drug cartels are not shy about making their presence known along the southern border to the point where they are turning everyday border towns into all-out war zones.
The southern U.S. border may seem a world away to many Americans, but behind the political expression lies a brutal underworld dominated by Mexico's ruthless drug cartels. Their multi-billion-dollar human smuggling trade relies on exploitation and control of migrants seeking to illegally cross into the United States. For years, their operations went unchecked as they illegally transferred thousands across the border each month. But growing security efforts have severely held back the cartel's trafficking business, making them more ruthless. They are willing to go to violent extremes to protect their area, burning barricades, sprayed bullets, armed interceptions. These terrifying cartel tactics target any threats to their border access. Masked gunmen emerge swiftly from the brush to aggressively deter those trying to capture their terrain. Today, in this video, we'll look into this lawless world at the border, revealing what happens when innocent civilians or bold journalists get in contact with ruthless cartels. We'll uncover the vast smuggling networks being disrupted by increased security along the border. And we'll see why Mexico's most vicious cartels are enraged by the US impacting their billion-dollar human trafficking empires. The cartels are ruthlessly determined to maintain dominance of the border at all costs.
But as we know, there are currently thousands of Central American migrants waiting at our southern border trying to enter the United States. This is not a new phenomenon. Regardless of which party is controlled, Republican or Democrat, we've dealt with sudden influxes of migrants for decades.
The US-Mexico border has long been a major route for illegal drugs and human trafficking operations run by Mexican cartels. However, in recent years, increased security and border control measures have made it much more difficult for the cartels to move their forbidden goods across the border. This has severely impacted the cartels' profits and operations. As a result, the cartels are extremely unhappy with the increase in security along the US-Mexico border. Over the past few decades, the US government has dramatically increased security and control measures along the southern border. This includes the construction of extensive border fencing, the deployment of advanced surveillance technology, and a huge increase in the number of Border Patrol agents. The US Border Patrol has also divided the southern border into sectors and deployed targeted surge operations to heavily patrol and crack down on busy smuggling corridors. Joint operations between US and Mexican authorities have also helped capture cartel members on both sides of the border. This massive border security buildup has directly interfered with the cartels and their criminal operations. Whereas the border was once relatively easily accessible and easy to get around, it is now filled with layered defenses that make illegal cross-border activities far more challenging. One of the biggest blows to the Mexican cartels has been the disruption of drug trafficking across the US border. Smuggling illicit drugs into the United States has long been one of the most profitable enterprises for the cartels. But as we mentioned, this increase of security at the border has made trafficking and smuggling much more riskier and difficult.
What we got going on here?
They're letting fentanyl across the border. They're letting cocaine across the border.
Did you let any fentanyl across?
Did you stop anybody?
These drug seizures show that smuggling operations are frequently detected and intercepted at the border before reaching their destinations inside the US. This means the cartels are losing valuable products and profits. And adding to this, the people smuggling these drugs are also being arrested more frequently, putting a dent to their smuggling networks. In response to the increased security, the cartels have been trying to shift drugs through alternative ports of entry and smuggling techniques. Cartels will try to conceal drugs in vehicles or send individual smugglers carrying drugs on foot across remote areas of the border. Traffickers are also using elaborate tunnels to move drugs under the border. Yet despite these efforts, the overall ability of cartels to push large drug loads across the border has still been highly constrained. In addition to illegal drugs, the Mexican cartels have also specialized in smuggling and trafficking people across the US border. But the US government's border crackdown has also come in the middle of these illicit immigration operations.
This massive influx of migrants has left large swaths of the border in Eagle Pass unpatrolled, literally unpatrolled.
The US-Mexico border has become a hotbed of activity in recent years as migrants seeking a better life look to cross into America. This rise in immigration has led to clashes between activists looking to provide humanitarian aid and those intent on stopping the flow of migrants.
With more than 12,000 illegal immigrants entering the U.S. border per day. In towns like Eagle Pass, Texas earlier in December, Texas Governor Greg Abbott has responded by installing over 100 miles of razor wire fence along the border, and an estimated 700,000 protesters known as the Take Our Border Back convoy is on its way to this small border town to defend America from an illegal immigrant invasion.
Most of these Haitian migrants had spent their life savings and taken out massive loans from shady sources, later revealed to be Mexican cartels. The cartels operate an underground economy that's run on human exploitation, charging desperate migrants unimaginable fees, upward of $10,000 per person for transferring to America. Many migrants find themselves trapped in dirty and filthy stash houses, stuffed in with 100 other people as they await to get transferred across the border. The cartels purposely keep them in inhumane conditions, using their fear and debt bondage to retain their control. Uncontrolled illnesses spread rapidly due to the unsanitary conditions, but the migrants cling to hope, seeing the crossing into America as their last lifeline. These migrants were following proper channels, requesting asylum at particular ports of entry on the border. However, the asylum process involved huge delays, with appointments backlogged for 4 or 6 months. This leaves migrants stuck in places like Tijuana for months on end, unable to work and vulnerable to the same cartels that charge huge smuggling fees. The cartels run extensive human trafficking and kidnapping rings in northern Mexico as well, making profits on desperate migrants uncertain of their future life. While asylum seekers undergo never-ending wait times, the cartels continue to profit off their helplessness.
Well, what it comes down to is these individuals that are crossing, they know that when they come through Mexico from different parts of the world, they're going to have to go in contact with the drug cartels. They're going to have to get in contact with the smugglers. So they're the ones that are going to control what's coming across, what's not.
The cartels operate with military precision, positioning scouts along the border to identify gaps and communicate with traffickers regarding timing. These scouts then signal traffickers when it's safe to move migrants across. America's broken immigration system allows the cartels to operate freely. They have adapted to increased security by expanding smuggling routes, using military technology like drones and encrypted communications, and recruiting elite enforcement gangs from Mexican special forces. As security tightens in one area, the distribution channels flexibly and rapidly shift to new sectors, routes, and gaps along the vast 2,000-mile US-Mexico border. The Mexican cartels have extensive operations facilitating illegal border crossings into the United States. As we mentioned before, most of these migrants pay the cartels steep fees, often taking out loans they cannot repay, leaving them trapped by the cartels. The cartels bribe government officials, including police, to allow their operations to continue. A major driver is the U.S. demand for undocumented migrant workers who can be exploited and underpaid compared to legal workers. Climate change pursuers, gang violence, and instability from U.S. policies also push many migrants to risk the dangerous illegal crossing controlled by cartels. When authorities increase security, the cartels quickly adapt routes. For example, building 100 miles of tall fences in Texas reduced crossings in that area, but the cartels soon found new entry points. The cartels take advantage of migrants' desperation to control and profit immensely from the illicit human smuggling across the US-Mexico border. But the cartels just shifted their routes. They cut new holes in the fence in remote areas, or they moved their operations to parts of California and Arizona with less security.
Live in Tacoma, California today. Bill, obviously we've seen a push to this direction since Texas tightened its own border. Now people are looking for other open spots, and they're ending up in California.
It's the first time I've ever seen this in my coverage of the border. Take a look up on this mountain right here. This is in Tacoma. This is a huge, rocky, steep mountain. It might be hard. We're trying to zoom in. There is literally like an ant trail of illegal immigrants coming down this valley, this crevice in this mountain right now, walking down and coming down to the bottom here, waiting to be apprehended by Border Patrol.
While politicians claim victories, the sophisticated Mexican cartels still control much of the 2,000-mile U.S.-Mexico border. The cartels ruthlessly fight back against border crackdowns through violence against agents, journalists, and activists. Their reach extends far beyond Mexico as they traffic migrants from Cuba, Haiti, Asia, and beyond. The border situation has no easy solution. It involves complex trade-offs that get oversimplified in political battles over national identity and immigration. While partisan conflicts rage, there are human realities at the border often overlooked. Migrant families face violence, poverty, and harsh policies that treat them as political pawns, rather than people with dignity. Children just want their most basic needs for food, shelter, and safety met. Progress requires seeing our shared humanity across divides of citizenship. However, in certain places, tensions flare between hardline enforcement and activist claims of human rights violations. Opening minds to complexities, not closing them with fixed positions, is the first step to solving the cycles of cruelty and needless suffering at the border.
Right now, a convoy is making its way across southeast Texas in protest of the Biden administration's border policies. Organizers are calling it the Take Our Border Back convoy. They stopped by Dripping Springs, a rural town 30 minutes outside of Austin today, to hold what they're calling a peaceful First Amendment gathering. Group leaders argue the Biden administration needs to do more to address security at the border. The protest comes as the standoff over border enforcement between Texas and the federal government intensifies.
Activist groups like Take Our Border Back hold rallies accusing the government of keeping borders open on purpose. To them, every migrant crossing represents dishonest attempts to increase Democratic votes. They call for deadly restraints like electrified fences and crocodile pits, seeking to permanently seal the border through force. Of course, the cartels avoid these efforts through their Haji resources and tactical agility. As seen in San Isidro, California, armed Mexican officers secured a major breach, so the cartels simply changed their route, establishing new gaps through rugged California desert. Politicians celebrate fleeting victories, but the easily exploited border remains dotted with hidden migrant camps under cartel control. Traffickers motivated by profits will stop at nothing to protect this pipeline. Migrants risk the dangerous journey because American businesses continue hiring them. The border cartels are merely fulfilling supply where there is demand. And demand remains strong for one key reason: undocumented workers can be easily exploited. Without legal protections, employers can and continue to underpay migrant workers while threatening to report them if they complain about conditions or attempt to go against them. These weaknesses will persist until the U.S. addresses the basic urges to exploit the vulnerable among us. Any society has elements that seek to maximize self-benefit, regardless of harm. And this is the ethical line the cartels have crossed. With rapid increase in demand for cheap, easily discarded labor, they have built a system of inhuman brutality, taking away migrant dignity for profits. The migrants represent human souls reduced to shipping cargo, loaded in boxes bound for U.S. businesses. Of course, the cartels could not operate without making their hands dirty along the way. Corruption remains widespread among Mexican authorities, paid to look the other way, as migrants are trafficked to the border. The cartels could not cross through Central America without officials on the take permitting their movement. Again, the cycle persists because the cartels meet an existing demand. In this case, bribery income for underpaid law enforcement. As Mexican leadership attacks the cruelty, lower-ranking officials continue enabling it. demonstrating how corruption goes into moral actors gradually compromised by circumstances. And the circumstances promoting illegal immigration have many sides to it. Gang violence increases daily as cartels compete for new drug corridors to America, leaving citizens terrorized. Well-intentioned U.S. foreign policy has resulted in unplanned disruption, adding further displacement of people. In this complex area, declaring the border issue black and white becomes impossible. There are only shifting shades of gray, good and bad impulses competing across human nature. The migrants themselves risk all for a shot at a better life, consumed by a vision of American prosperity. This vision has been nurtured through decades of U.S. cultural dominance, movies and media depicting life in the shining city on a hill. The lure remains strong in poorer rural regions, though the contemporary reality is complex. Still, hope persists of streets paved in gold, rooted in visions of American exceptionalism. And this broader context is key to understanding the pain behind border crossings. When your family faces violence and poverty with no opportunity, the risk seems called for, whatever the cost. Especially when ruthless cartel marketing hangs the everlasting dream that just over the border lies a good life. And so, the cycle continues as U.S. policy miscalculates the shifts in global migration. As instability rises in Central America and beyond, official channels for legal migration remain stuck in delays. So, the cartels gladly step into the breach, seizing the opportunity for exploitation. With profits to be made, their persuasion machine runs strong. The promises of America retained in pop culture propel enough motivation. And with rocks and desert at their back, the desperate see only one path forward, though it leads into darkness. This polarity has come to define the immigration debate, which candidates purposely exploit to inflame passions and cultivate loyalty. They frame stark choices pitting morality against security, all for political benefit. In this day and age, the voice of reason struggles to be heard. Those who seek context and compassion become casualties, voices drowned out by the loud and angry. An issue with so many interdependent variables defies such reductive orthodoxy. Perhaps the greatest tragedy is how rapidly the soul can normalize these acts of cruelty when it's protected from its impacts. The comforts allowing such indifference rely on the suppression of unpleasant realities. Out of sight, out of mind, and out of moral conscience, the cartels engage in horrific violence, including beheadings, torture, and dismemberment, to terrorize and intimidate rivals, as well as civilians. They have killed thousands of people in Mexico. They forcibly recruit young teens into their ranks, exposing them to extreme violence and exploitation. Children have been trafficked by cartels as hitmen, lookouts, and drug mules. Cartels systematically kidnap, extort, and threaten business owners, farmers, and everyday citizens. Failure to comply with their demands often results in the murder of the victims and their families. They ambush and kill police officers, journalists, and public officials who speak out against them. The cartels use violence and corruption to undermine democratic institutions. Weapons and drug trafficking by cartels destabilize societies on both sides of the border. Powerful assault rifles and military-grade armaments give cartels overwhelming firepower against Mexican authorities. The huge profits from drug sales allow cartels to bribe public officials up to the highest levels. This corrupts and weakens Mexico's government institutions and the rule of law. Cartels make billions producing and distributing dangerous illegal drugs like meth, heroin, fentanyl, and cocaine, which destroys lives and communities in the U.S. and Mexico. Cartel associates have filled the Montana province with fentanyl and meth, and also opened up their businesses on Indian reservations that are known for low law enforcement security. On the evening of March 17, 2020, a former Mexican police officer working for the cartel left his hotel room in Tijuana and walked across the U.S. border into Southern California at 10:09 at night. Ricardo Ramos Medina's first stop was San Diego International Airport, where he found a tourist car he rented out. He went somewhere close, and he had the privilege of meeting a lady who delivered drugs in the name of a supermarket sack that had methamphetamine inside. Compared to that, he had been traveling for 20 minutes only, and then he started a much longer trip, a 16-hour drive to Montana. Medina had been to the trip a number of times on different occasions. However, in this visit, it didn't work as previous ones. Before he reached his destination, there had been an unlawful seizure inflicted upon him by the state and federal agents. Inside his white Jeep, they found about 2 pounds of pure methamphetamine, enough, authorities said, to supply the entire town of Townsend, Montana. The bust in the course of which the arrest took place is a case of the drug trafficking ring, whose victims are at least 2,000 pounds of methamphetamine and 700,000 pills containing fentanyl, and sent to Pennsylvania from Mexico in 3 seasons. The result was all about money. In such dirty trade like this, a drug dealer could have made so much more profit in Montana than in any other place. Throughout the years, Mexico has been the primary substance trafficking conduit into more isolated U.S. areas. However, due to the fentanyl onslaught, these cartel affiliates have been brutal closer to the borders in Montana, where pills can be sold for about 20 times their original price in the city centers. Officials in the law enforcement sector confirmed. Some parts of the state have literally been steeped in drugs. Annoyingly, tribal chiefs have increasingly expressed their worries about a scourge of crime and overdose epidemic. Certain reservations have witnessed cartel partners getting involved with Native women into romantic and marital relationships, with each one looking to infiltrate and entrench themselves within those communities for selling the drugs, confirmed tribal authorities and law enforcement officers. Dealers from cartels are slowly bringing in even some Native Americans into their business by using them as teenage experimenters, and they turn them into addicts who then end up in debt to the traffickers. The Mexican cartels have also created a climate of fear through their extreme violence and intimidation tactics. Their criminal enterprises undermine security, governance, and the legitimate economy in Mexico, and threaten public health and safety in the United States. Many asylum seekers sent to Mexico by the U.S. have suffered violence and abuse by Mexican police, immigration agents, and criminal groups. Over 70,000 people have been sent to Mexico by the U.S. to wait for asylum hearings under the Remain in Mexico program since 2019. Many were kidnapped, extorted, or assaulted in Mexico. Migrants in Mexico are often afraid to report crimes to the police because the police are part of the problem. Some police and immigration agents demand bribes and threaten deportation if migrants don't pay. Criminal groups also target and kidnap migrants to demand ransom payments from their families. Migrants are easy victims because they stand out and carry documents showing they are passing through. Without proper ID cards and paperwork, migrants in Mexico cannot work legally, go to school, access healthcare, or open a bank account. Mexican authorities have not helped them get these documents. Most migrants are too scared to leave their shelters, seek jobs or medical care, or send their kids to school because of fear of violence and extortion. The U.S. should stop sending asylum seekers back to Mexico where they face danger. Mexico should investigate crimes against migrants and make sure they can safely access services. Steps are needed to protect asylum seekers in Mexico until they can enter the U.S. safely and legally. The current situation puts them at constant risk of abuse with nowhere to turn for help. These examples reflect the border's harsh terrain requiring impossible choices. The reality of life today, engulfing the region, leaves no clean resolutions, only least worst options. But we avoid this uncertainty by viewing things simply, choosing sides, and clinging to them. Yet when the lens pulls back, life's complexity comes into focus. The currents driving human movements on a warming, unstable planet will only accelerate. Borders that once stood tight now appear as open gateways, requiring vision beyond the statuses of migrants and citizens. Perhaps recognizing shared struggles can provide the foundation to move forward. Though progress seems unlikely, when expression grows to become a huge conflict. By taking out difficult positions, we sacrifice measured discourse and the chance to discover common ground. Yet when minds stay closed, the suffering continues the same as before, though it's now met with indifference justified through the cover comforts of rage. This cold reality awaits the migrant mother, cradling her child as they surrender to the Border Patrol. In the eyes behind each face lies a story, a narrative we'll never know. And without meaning, they fade anonymously as numbers while the great political wheel churns on. For lives dependent on the compassion of strangers, this completes their misery. But amongst the detachment, they cling to hope, as hope remains last to die. Through this repeated cycle, the border has become a community that has divided America at odds with itself. As the nation struggles to define identity, so does the borderland, severed and reconstituted as beliefs ebb and flow. The migrants are swept up in historical currents, far outpacing them as generations clash over ideology and demographics. Their fates now hinge on the swings of domestic politics, faith placed in leaders who prefer money and profits over stability. And the cartels seize this chance, exploiting the absence of a steady purpose that might impede their profiteering. For them, disruption equals dollars, as both sides become captive to short-term interests. Here at the border, perhaps more than anywhere, sharp commonalities are laid open, showing the world that the loss of humanity binds us more than divides us. But what future gestures for a nation incapable of declaring this self-evident revelation, without which there can be no lasting union? The border was created by human divisions, but understanding can overcome the lines falsely dividing us from fellow people seeking better lives like any of us. Progress depends on reawakening conscience and social responsibility. By valuing humanity over status, we build the foundations to move forward. The border crisis lays America's choices bare. Will we accept hard truths and social responsibility, or retreat deeper into ignorance and fear of the other? Looking ahead, the way forwards is for continuous and intense confrontation between U.S. border security interests and the troubling activities of Mexican cartels. Too much money is at stake for either side to back down or give in. Though progress has been made, the border clearly remains vulnerable to continued exploitation. Therefore, American politicians and policymakers will keep pushing for more barriers, agents, sensors, and other tools to lock the border down. Efforts will also continue targeting cartel leaders, even if the elimination of entire cartels proves impossible. Nevertheless, persistent pressure can constrict the freedom of operation currently enjoyed by the cartels. Yet, the Mexican cartels have also proven highly flexible and adaptive to enforcement crackdowns. They will continue evolving trafficking tactics, routes, and creative ventures to bypass strengthened American defenses. Areas with softer maritime borders will become increasingly utilized as overland crossing gets harder. This game of cat and mouse seems likely to intensify in the years ahead. Ultimately, the border region promises to remain a central battleground between the interests of U.S. law enforcement and the Mexican cartels. Control and exploitation of the border are simply too important for the ambitions of either side. Small victories may be achieved, but permanent resolution is impossible, given the fundamental clash in objectives. While heightened security has clearly damaged the cross-border enterprises of Mexican cartels, it certainly hasn't defeated them. Cartels remain resourceful, flexible, and enthused by spectacular profits. So long as strong illicit demand exists within the United States, the cartels will find ways to service such markets, however risky and problematic. Therefore, the U.S.-Mexico border promises to retain its outsized prominence in the North American illegal drug trade, and residents on both sides of the divide will continue experiencing the traumatic impacts of cartel violence raging around this politically contentious boundary. Neither the cartels nor American authorities seem likely to offer the other any respite or accommodation. So, for the foreseeable future, relations along the U.S.-Mexico border seem destined to remain tense and aggressive. The future in taking down on all cartel activities will prove gradual and uneven. Thus, border security buildups will continue even as cartel resistance and adaptability persist. This stretched-out struggle may produce short-term wins, but promises even greater frustration and dysfunction if more collaborative and holistic policies are not adopted. With billions in trafficking dollars at stake, the ruthless cartels seem unafraid to threaten or attack anyone perceived as a threat, wielding unchecked power across Mexico's lawless border regions. Their reign continues unchallenged, for now. Do you think increased security efforts will eventually undermine cartel control of border crossings? Or are the cartels simply too powerful and adaptable to ever truly stop? Let us know your thoughts on the troubling cartel dominance of Mexico's border zones.